A struggling farmer finds an injured pilot in his field, only to learn she's a millionaire who will change his fate forever. The wind howled across the open fields of Oklahoma like a wounded beast, bending the wheat low and sending sheets of rain slashing sideways. Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the worn wood of the farmhouse that stood like a stubborn relic against the fury of the storm. Inside, Blair Cole sat at the kitchen table with his hands wrapped around a chipped mug of black coffee, staring at the envelope from the bank that lay open on the table. Final notice, foreclosure imminent. He had read it 3 times and still could not feel anything but numb. Then it happened. A deafening roar ripped through the sky, low, close, wrong. It wasn't thunder. It was the mechanical scream of something falling, something big. A flash of red light streaked past the window, followed by a boom so violent it rattled the glass panes. Blair was on his feet in seconds, grabbing his coat, flashlight, and the old first aid kit before bolting into the night. Outside, the rain hit like a wall, soaking him instantly as he ran toward the back of the property, where smoke now curled into the sky, glowing faintly orange in the darkness. He vaulted over the wire fence, boots sinking into the muddy earth, breath coming hard and fast. What he found in the field stole the air from his lungs. A small aircraft, a single-engine plane, lay twisted and broken amidst the crops. One wing was crumpled completely, the other hung by a few strands of metal. Flames licked the back end, threatening to ignite the fuel tank. Sparks crackled in the rain, and inside the shattered cockpit, barely visible through the cracked glass, was someone. A person. A woman. Blair scrambled onto the wreckage, shielding his face from the heat, and yanked open the cockpit door with all the strength he had. It groaned and gave way. The pilot was slumped forward, a dark smear of blood on her forehead, her flight suit torn at the leg where a jagged piece of metal jutted out grotesquely. "Hey, hey," Blair shouted, shaking her shoulder. "Can you hear me?" She groaned, barely conscious. He pulled her gently out of the seat, careful not to move the injured leg more than necessary. The moment he shifted her weight, she screamed, a sharp guttural sound that cut through the storm. The metal had pierced deep. He could feel it shifting against bone. "God," he muttered, glancing back at the smoke, now darker, thicker. He dragged her away from the wreckage as fast as he could, her blood leaving a trail in the mud. When they were a safe distance away, he laid her down beneath a wide oak and pulled out his phone with trembling hands. 911? The call barely connected through the static of the storm. "Emergency services. What is your location? This is Blair Cole, County Road 13, Southeast Field. A plane just went down in my field, a small one. The pilot's alive but badly hurt. You need to send an ambulance now." "Sir, we are tracking severe weather in your area. Response times are delayed due to—" "She's bleeding out," Blair snapped. "Her leg is impaled. And there's smoke from the wreck. The plane could blow. Sir, we'll dispatch a unit, but conditions are not safe for air or road rescue at this time. We advise you to—" Blair didn't wait to hear the rest. He hung up, rain dripping from his lashes as he looked down at the unconscious woman. "Damn it," he muttered, and opened the first aid kit. Her leg was bad, real bad. The metal had punctured deep through the muscle, and every time she moved, even slightly, she whimpered in pain. He knew what he had to do, and it terrified him. He took a deep breath, kneeling beside her. "I need you to stay with me," he whispered, even though her eyes were closed. "If I don't get this out, you'll lose too much blood," she moaned, her fingers curling in the wet earth. Blair sterilized the area as best he could, hands shaking, knuckles white as he gripped the metal shard. Lightning lit the sky as he counted under his breath. 2, 3, he pulled. The woman screamed, thrashing despite the pain, blood gushing over his hands. Blair quickly packed the wound with gauze, wrapping it tightly with a strip of fabric from his own shirt, then pressed down with all his weight. "Stay with me," he said, voice cracking. "Don't you dare quit on me now." Her breathing was shallow but steady. The wreckage behind them hissed and popped, fire now dancing higher, brighter. But under the tree, in the mud and the blood, Blair held the stranger in his arms and realized something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not for himself, but maybe, just maybe, for someone else. The morning came slow and gray, with clouds hanging heavy over the horizon, and the scent of scorched earth still lingering in the air. Inside the farmhouse, the only sound was the steady ticking of the old wall clock, and the occasional hiss from the kettle on the stove. Nora stirred in the guest room, if it could be called that. It was really just the old room Blair's daughter once used years ago. Now it was filled with stacked boxes, books with cracked spines and dust that danced in the filtered light. She blinked at the ceiling for a moment before the pain hit. A sharp groan escaped her lips as she tried to move, her legs screaming in protest. Blair was already there, crouched beside the bed, checking the bandage. "Easy," he said softly. "You're lucky to be alive." She turned to him, dazed but aware. "Where am I?" "My place. You crashed in my field. You don't remember?" "I remember the storm," she said, her voice hoarse. "Then everything went dark." He handed her a glass of water. "Drink, slowly." She obeyed, drinking half before setting it down. "Thank you for saving me." "What's your name?" he asked, his voice calm but curious. She hesitated just a second too long. "Nora." It didn't sit right. Something about the pause, the way her eyes flicked to the window before answering. But Blair nodded, accepting it for now. Over the next 2 days, Nora rested and healed, though she insisted on trying to sit up and move around too soon. Blair caught her more than once examining his tools, running her fingers across the dusty aviation books on the shelf, and once disassembling and reassembling his old shortwave radio without a single instruction. She knew things, not just general knowledge, but specific, trained knowledge about equipment, flight navigation, and emergency protocols. Her hands moved like a mechanic's, her posture like a soldier's. Blair watched her from the kitchen window one morning as she sat on the porch, using a pocket knife to carve a small block of wood. Her grip, her balance despite the injury, her quiet focus. It was all too practiced. "Where'd you learn to fly?" he asked casually that afternoon while changing her bandage. She smiled faintly. "Private instruction, long time ago. Must have been more than that. Your radio knowledge, the way you handle tools, that's more than a few hours of flight school." Her smile didn't falter, but it didn't reach her eyes either. "I've always been a fast learner." He didn't push further, and yet even as questions gathered in his mind, something inside Blair resisted the urge to pry. It wasn't just because she had almost died on his land. It wasn't guilt. It was something else, a pull, a feeling that whatever she was hiding, it was because she had no choice. And he knew that feeling well. On the third night it happened. Blair had gone out to check on the chicken coop when he noticed movement near the barn. A shadow, too still to be wind, too quiet to be animal. He stepped back slowly, grabbed the shotgun from behind the shed wall, and made his way through the tall grass. The figure was moving toward the house, dressed in black, holding something. Blair raised the barrel. "Stop right there!" The figure froze. "I said stop. Turn around, slowly." The man turned, half lit by the moonlight, early 30s, clean-shaven. "Not from around here." He smiled faintly. "Easy, friend? I'm just looking for someone, a woman. Name's Nora. She might have crashed nearby." "Why are you looking for her?" "Let's just say she belongs to someone important." Blair's jaw clenched. "She doesn't belong to anyone." The man took a step forward. Blair fired a warning shot into the dirt at his feet. "I said, that's far enough." The stranger held up both hands, backing away. Okay, no need to get violent. But this isn't over." "You come back here," Blair growled, "and it will be." The man disappeared into the night without another word. Back in the house, Nora was sitting up on the couch, pale, wide-eyed. "Who was it?" she asked. Blair closed the door and bolted it. "Someone looking for you?" Nora didn't speak, just stared at the floor, her hands clenched in her lap. "You want to tell me who you really are now?" he asked quietly. She looked up at him, guilt swimming in her eyes. "Not yet," she whispered, "but soon." And Blair, despite every red flag, every unanswered question, simply nodded, because something told him whatever this was, it had only just begun. By the end of the week, Nora was walking again, slowly, with a crutch Blair had carved and sanded smooth by hand, but walking. Her strength returned in pieces, along with her curiosity. And instead of resting, as instructed, she turned her attention to something else entirely. The farm. It started small. She noticed a stack of unopened bills on the kitchen counter and asked gently if Blair had a system for tracking expenses. He gave a hollow laugh and admitted his system involved stuffing the unopened ones in a drawer and hoping they'd disappear. She offered to organize them, just to help. No pressure. 2 hours later, she had color-coded every invoice, sorted them by urgency, and created a spreadsheet from scratch on his old, barely defunctioning laptop. She even recalculated loan interest to find inconsistencies that made Blair squint and mutter, "Where the hell did you learn this stuff?" "Trial and error," she said with a faint smile. "Lots of error." The next day she asked about his crops, why he kept planting the same soy and corn rotation when prices had tanked the last 3 seasons. He shrugged. "It's what my father planted. It's what I know." Nora looked out at the land, quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What if you tried something different? High-end greens for local farm-to-table restaurants. Kale, heirloom carrots, purple basil. Small batch, but premium pricing." Blair scoffed at first, but she was persistent. She even sketched a layout for a quarter-acre test plot and showed him the math on a napkin. Costs, profit margins, turnaround times. "You know," he said one evening as they sat on the porch, "you talk a lot like a business consultant, not a pilot." Nora sipped her tea, eyes on the horizon. "Maybe I used to be both." They spent the next 2 weeks rebuilding the greenhouse together. Morning light came with coffee and gloves. By noon they were side by side in the dirt, digging rows, spreading compost, building trellises. It was hard, sweaty work, but it came with a strange sense of peace neither of them mentioned aloud. In the afternoons, they cleaned the chicken coop, refitted the barn roof, and joked about selling homemade pickles. Laughter came easier now. So did trust. One evening, while repairing a section of the irrigation pipe that had burst, Blair wiped his brow and sat down heavily on a nearby hay bale. Nora joined him, her hands streaked with mud and grease. "You ever think," he asked quietly, "about how fast it can all go away?" She looked at him, unsure. "My wife," he said. "Sarah. We met in high school. She got sick after our daughter turned 3, cancer. It moved fast, real fast." Nora's face softened. "I'm sorry." He nodded. "After I buried them, I stopped living. Just went through the motions. This land was all I had left, and even it's trying to leave me now." Silence stretched between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. Nora looked down at her hands. "I've lost too." He glanced over. "You?" She hesitated, then said, "My first crash wasn't this one. 5 years ago I was a test pilot. Small jet, malfunction mid-air, barely survived. I was grounded for over a year." Blair's eyes widened. "And you went back?" "Because I thought I had something to prove." She took a breath. "What made it worse was the company that built the plane? My father's. His name is on half the hangars in the country." Blair blinked. "Wait, your father owns—" Nora cut him off gently. "Don't say it. Not yet." She stood, brushing off her hands. "I wasn't just running from the crash this time. I was running from the part of me that forgot how to feel grounded." Blair stood with her. "You're grounded now." She gave him a long, unreadable look. "Yeah," she whispered, "I think I am." The wind moved softly through the wheat fields behind them, carrying with it the scent of something new. And neither of them said it aloud, but they both felt it. Whatever had begun here in the dust, between soil and sweat, was no longer just about saving a farm. The night was unusually calm. For once the wind had quieted, and the sky was a vast ink-blue canvas sprinkled with stars. The moon hung heavy and full, casting silver light over the fields like a silent blessing. Blair had dragged out 2 old lawn chairs, dusted them off and set them side by side, just beyond the barn where the scent of tilled earth still lingered. Nora limped slightly as she made her way over, wrapped in Blair's flannel jacket that dwarfed her frame. Her hair was tied back loosely, a few strands blowing across her cheek. She sat beside him with a soft sigh. "I forgot how quiet it can be out here," she murmured. Blair nodded. "That's the only thing the world hasn't tried to take from me." They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the distant hum of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves in the orchard. Nora tilted her head back, eyes tracing the slow path of a satellite drifting across the stars. You ever look up and wonder how something so far away can seem so peaceful? Sometimes, Blair said. But then I remember, peace looks different up close. She smiled faintly, then went quiet again. Her voice dropped when she spoke next. There's something about being in the sky that feels godlike, she said. You're above everything. The pain, the memories, the weight. But then turbulence hits or an engine sputters and suddenly you're just flesh and bone again, praying the ground doesn't forget you. Blair turned to her. You afraid of flying? No, she said. I'm afraid of falling and realizing I never had control to begin with. He reached for her hand, not in a rush, not in desire, but with something quieter, something that asked permission. When their fingers met, she didn't pull away. His hand was rough, calloused. Hers was steady, scarred. They fit somehow. The warmth between them was subtle but growing, like the slow burn of embers under ash. I don't want to go back, she whispered. To the world that only knows how to take. You don't have to, Blair replied. She looked at him then, really looked. Don't say that. You don't know what it means. I know what it means to want to stay, he said simply. Their faces were close now, breaths mingling in the cool air. The distance between them shrank, and for a moment it seemed inevitable, like the moon had drawn them into its orbit. But just as his lips nearly brushed hers, Nora turned her head, stepping back, her breath catching. No, she whispered, voice shaking. Don't, Blair froze. Nora, you shouldn't love me, she said, backing away, her eyes shining. You don't even know who I really am, and if you did, you'd hate me for it. Tears welled up and spilled over as she clenched her fists. I wasn't supposed to land here. I wasn't supposed to feel anything. I'm not supposed to stay. She turned and limped back toward the house, each step heavy with something Blair couldn't name. He stayed in the chair, staring at the moon, feeling the echo of her absence in the space where her hand had been. The night, which had felt full only moments ago, now felt like a vacuum. And still, somewhere beneath the ache, something told him this wasn't goodbye. Not yet. It began with a single notification. Blair had been in the barn, repairing the fencing along the west field, when his phone buzzed. He wiped his hands on his jeans and glanced at the screen. Breaking news! Aviation heiress missing for over a month found alive. Exclusive sources say she was disguised as civilian. His heart stilled. The photo that accompanied the article was unmistakable. It was Nora. Only not the Nora he knew. In the picture, she wore a tailored blazer, sleek sunglasses, stepping off a private jet with military escorts behind her. Her real name was printed in bold beneath the headline, Nora Everstone. Blair stumbled back a step, nearly dropping the phone. The Everstone name was impossible to ignore. His mind raced. Everstone, the multi-billion-dollar aviation empire that dominated the skies, produced military jets, and had recently acquired 2 regional banks, including the one that had denied Blair's loan extension the year before. The same denial that pushed him into foreclosure. The name was carved into the rejection letter he had burned and cursed in the dead of night. Now that name was her, and she had been living under his roof. He rushed back to the house, flung open the front door, and found her standing in the kitchen. She looked startled, phone still in hand, her face pale. You knew? He demanded, his voice raw. You knew who you were the whole time? I was going to tell you, she said quickly, but I didn't know how. Everstone. He spat the name like poison. The same company that buried me, that killed every loan option I had. Nora took a step forward. I didn't know they denied your loan. I'm sure it never crossed your mind, he snapped, because people like you don't see people like me. You fall out of the sky, into my life, and now I'm supposed to just smile and pretend none of this matters? It wasn't a lie, she said, her voice trembling. I wanted to be someone else for a while. Someone real, not a title, not a face in a press release. Blair shook his head. You came here saying you were lost, but the truth is, I'm the one who's been drowning, and I let you in. I let you matter. A flash of movement outside caught his eye, black SUVs crawling up the dirt road like mechanical spiders. Lights, sirens, cameras. They found me, Nora whispered. "My father must have—" The vehicles came to a stop in the yard and men in suits poured out like floodwaters. One of them approached the house, speaking into a radio. "We have visual. Subject located." Nora turned to Blair, eyes full of silent desperation. "Please, let me explain later." But the door opened before she could finish. A tall man entered, silver-haired, stern-jawed. The resemblance to Nora was immediate. "Time to go," he said coldly. "Dad, no scenes. You've made enough headlines." Blair stood in front of her. "She's not a prisoner." "Mr. Cole," her father said sharply, "thank you for not calling the authorities sooner, but this is a family matter now." Guards flanked Nora, guiding her gently but firmly out the door. She looked back over her shoulder. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said softly. "You were the only real thing I've had in years." Then she was gone. The house emptied, the vehicles drove away, and silence fell over the farm like a second storm. Blair stood frozen in the doorway for a long time, the wind rattling the porch screen. Then he walked inside, numb, and sat in front of the old laptop where Nora had built his financial tracker, mapped out crop plans, left hopeful messages in the margins. He stared at the screen. Then he lifted the computer and slammed it against the wall. It shattered. The spreadsheets, the dreams, the pieces of her, gone. His chest heaved, eyes blazing. "No more lies," he whispered. "No more saviors. No more Everstones." Outside, the moon rose again, indifferent, and inside, Blair swore to never let anyone with power touch his life again. The silence that followed Nora's departure wasn't just emotional, it was physical. Within 48 hours, Blair's farm was under temporary investigation. Authorities cited aiding in the concealment of a high-profile missing person, even though no charges were filed. Still, the damage was done. Access roads were blocked, buyers pulled out of contracts, deliveries stopped arriving. Even the neighbor who once lent him a tractor now avoided his calls. The land, which had only just begun to feel alive again, now sat in limbo, crops half-harvested, irrigation pipes idle, the greenhouse doors padlocked by order of local enforcement. Blair stood in the center of his fields on the 6th day, hands hanging uselessly by his sides. The sky was gray again, as if mocking his hope. He hadn't touched his tools. He hadn't stepped foot in the barn. The only thing he had done was throw a half-broken mug at the wall when another bill came in with a red "Final" stamped across the top. He didn't sleep that night. But the next morning something changed. A plain manila envelope sat on his porch, tucked neatly beneath a stone. No postmark, no name, no sender. Inside was a single piece of paper, a printout, slightly crinkled at the edges. It was a business plan. He knew it instantly. It was Nora's. Or at least a version of it. Updated, cleaner, more focused. It mapped out everything from the crop rotation schedule to a small-scale agritourism model designed to engage local schools and food cooperatives. There were graphs, handwritten margin notes, and a list of 5 local vendors already contacted, somehow. Tucked into the corner was a yellow sticky note, her handwriting unmistakable. "If you still believe in seeds, then plant them. Some only grow in the ashes." N. Blair sat on the porch, reading the note over and over again. He didn't cry, not yet. But something cracked open inside him, a small trembling pulse that hadn't stirred in weeks. Hope. He pulled the tarp off his tractor later that day. By nightfall he was digging rows again. But this time, he didn't do it alone. He filmed a short video with his old phone, standing in front of the field, dirt on his hands and determination in his voice. "My name is Blair Cole," he said. "I'm a farmer. I've lost a lot, but I've also seen what happens when someone believes in something that no one else does. If you're out there and you believe food should come from honest hands and honest land, I need your help. Not for me, for this farm, for what it can still be." He posted the video to a crowdfunding platform and went to bed without much hope. By morning, it had been shared 3,000 times. By the end of the week, donations poured in from everywhere. Old friends, anonymous donors, even a few restaurants from the next county that remembered Nora's name but not her scandal. Local high school students volunteered to help rebuild. A retired teacher offered to tutor young interns on site if the education center ever became real. And Blair? He worked. With blistered palms and sweat-soaked shirts, he turned heartbreak into harvest, one seed at a time. The day of the grand opening dawned bright and warm, with the kind of sun that made everything shimmer with a quiet sense of possibility. Dozens of volunteers and supporters gathered at the newly transformed land that once teetered on the edge of collapse. The new sign above the archway read, "Farm of Freedom." It was more than a name. It was a promise. Blair stood near the small wooden stage, dressed in his usual flannel and jeans, but for the first time in months, there was a calm strength in his posture. His hands were calloused, his shirt stained, but when he looked at what had been built, rows of fresh vegetables, a greenhouse buzzing with life, a small outdoor classroom for children, he felt something close to pride. The community had shown up more than he expected. There were farmers, students, teachers, reporters, and even families who had donated just $5, but came to see what their seed of support had grown into. As he stepped up to the microphone, Blair glanced at the crowd, heart pounding a little faster than usual. His eyes swept the faces, some familiar, some not, but the one face he kept looking for wasn't there. Still, he spoke. "This land used to be all I had. It was failing, and so was I. I'd given up on people, on second chances. But then someone crash-landed into my life and everything changed. She reminded me that what looks like an ending might just be where something better starts." The crowd applauded gently. Blair nodded in thanks, but didn't step down yet. His eyes scanned the back rows again. Then he saw her. She stood slightly apart from the others, wearing a wide-brimmed straw hat that shaded most of her face, but he knew. He would have known her anywhere. Nora. As the clapping died down, she stepped forward. Her gait was steady, confident, but softer than before. She no longer wore the mask of power or secrecy. She was just herself. When she reached the stage, she looked up at him and took a breath. "I've lived my whole life doing what was expected," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "Succeeding for someone else's definition of success, earning titles, surviving accidents, pretending I wasn't broken." Blair didn't move. The crowd leaned in. "But the person who saved me," she continued, "didn't ask me to prove anything. He gave me space to be lost, to feel, to heal." Her eyes met his. "I've lived for my father's legacy long enough. Now I want to live for the man who pulled me from fire and planted me back in the earth." A hush fell over the farm. Then Blair stepped forward, his arms wrapping around her with a kind of certainty that erased every doubt he had once felt. The crowd erupted in applause. Some cheered, others wiped their eyes. In that moment, under the wide Oklahoma sky, the past and its betrayals faded into the distance. All that remained was a field full of life, a crowd full of hope, and two people who had finally found their way back to each other. Together, rooted. 1 year later, the Farm of Freedom had become more than a rescue story. It had become a living, breathing community. The fields stretched wide and golden, humming with bees and bursting with life. Raised garden beds overflowed with greens and tomatoes. The old barn had been transformed into a workshop and teaching center. Every morning people arrived, some with dirt under their nails and experience in their bones, others with only questions and a desperate need to begin again. There were teenagers who had dropped out of school, finding purpose in planting seeds and watching something grow. There were veterans rebuilding their lives, learning how to work with their hands instead of fighting ghosts. Retirees came to teach, to listen, to be needed again. Children ran barefoot between rows of lavender, chasing butterflies and carrying baskets full of strawberries. And through it all, Blair and Nora moved together, partners in purpose, in sweat, in laughter. Nora had officially stepped away from the Everstone empire. Her resignation made headlines for a week, but she didn't give a single interview. She didn't need to. Her new legacy was here, in the heart of the land, where her hands were caked in earth and her heart was finally still. She designed new curriculums for the farm's education program. She taught flight theory to curious kids using paper airplanes and solar drones. She spent early mornings mending fences and late afternoons sitting with women who had come from shelters, helping them journal out their pain. Blair never asked her to explain herself again. He simply gave her space, and she filled it with light. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the fields glowed orange, Blair led Nora to a small wooden structure he'd been building for weeks in secret, a little covered pergola nestled among the wildflowers at the edge of the property. The roof was slatted cedar, vines already starting to wind around the posts. Hanging lanterns swayed gently in the breeze. A small bench sat beneath it, worn but lovingly carved. Nora looked around, touched the beams. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Blair took her hand. "It's not finished yet." She turned to him, eyes curious. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small hand-carved box. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, with a single wild flower engraved along the band. "I don't have a cathedral or a headline," he said, "but I have this land, and I have you, and that's enough for me." Nora blinked, her breath catching. "So I have to ask," he continued, voice trembling just slightly. "Will you grow old with me here? Will you keep planting hope with me, one season at a time?" She stared at him for a long second and then, without a word, threw her arms around him. Her voice, muffled by his chest, cracked as she whispered, "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They kissed as the sky turned dusky purple, the scent of jasmine floating on the breeze. Later that night, sitting under the stars, Nora leaned against Blair's shoulder, her fingers laced with his. "I still remember the moment everything went black in that plane," she said. "I thought I'd die knowing only pressure and speed and emptiness." Blair turned his head, kissed her hair. "You didn't fall?" he said softly. "You landed." Nora smiled through a tear. "Right into you." Blair looked out over the moonlit fields, where every row whispered of resilience and quiet miracles. Then he said the words he had carried in his heart since the first time she had opened her eyes in his guest room. "You didn't fall from the sky, Nora. You fell right into the part of me that had died and made it live again." And under the open sky, where the earth held their past and future, they sat in the place where healing had rooted itself deep, where love, like every good harvest, had grown from broken ground. Thank you for joining us on this unforgettable journey of second chances, healing, and the kind of love that grows where no one expects it. Between furrows of failure, beneath the weight of heartbreak, and in the most unexpected crash landings. Blair and Nora's story reminds us that sometimes what falls apart does so only to be rebuilt into something stronger, truer, and more beautiful. That even the most broken ground can yield the richest harvest when watered by trust, effort, and a little bit of courage. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you to believe in love after loss, in purpose after pain, then please subscribe to Soul Stirring Stories. Here we tell the tales that stay with you long after the final word. Click subscribe to never miss a story that just might change your day or your life. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and keep planting seeds of love.